Hey everyone, today we're going to do a care guide on the Monstera Deliciosa Aurea. Now we've done a care guide on the Monstera albo, the Monstera Thai constellation, and now we're finally doing the Aurea. The Aurea is characterized by having a variegation that's a bit of like a lime green yellow in its leaf, as opposed to the white of the albo and more of the cream yellow color of the Thai constellation. Aurea light. As you can see here, I have this Aurea here in the back, as well as these Aurea here under grow lights as per usual with most of my Monstera Deliciosa Variegata. Out of the three variegated Monstera that I have, the albo, the Thai, and the Aurea definitely prefers less light. Oftentimes we'll try and hide their leaves kind of under the shade of another one of the albos, because what we found is that they tend to brown and blacken on the variegated parts of the leaf. This is an all variegated leaf. You can see the little bit of green there, but the rest is like this lime green yellow. And when they get too much light, they tend to brown off and blacken. Also, humidity can contribute to this, but we have found that out of the three variegated Monsteras that we have, the Aurea does prefer a little bit less light. Now, it does still need a good amount of light. I have both of these lights above this 8-foot tray, and they consume about 250 watts a piece. Again, I want to keep them about 3 to 4 feet away from the plants to be safe and get them closer, but if you see any sort of bleaching or browning, you want to pull back the lights a little bit. Water is going to be pretty much similar to the rest of the variegated Monstera. You're going to want to keep the media reasonably hydrated, don't overwater. They tend to get root rot, but not as bad as the Thai constellation. But they do tend to have a slower growing rooting system, but we'll go over that in the propagation section. For growing media, I do prefer the Leca perlite or just the pure Leca. That's what I have this big mom in the back. She's in 100% Leca and we're watering her quite frequently. Because this plant does have a thicker root system like the Monstera, she does do really well in pure Leca. Think of each plant needing a kind of thicker media for a thicker root system. So these big chunks of Leca do great with the thick roots of the Aurea. But we also do have one in aeroid mix that works out fine, but just watch out for overwatering and keeping too much hydration in that media. That's why I like something well draining like Leca perlite, or Pond. It's pretty much the same as all other variegated Monstera. All right, next up is fertilizer. The Aurea, just like all variegated Monstera, typically likes a lot of light and also likes a lot of food. So as you're feeding it more light, it's gonna need more air circulation and it's gonna need more nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So we love to use our AB to grow all these plants, every single plant in this grow room, which is just a 2-part Leca system. You can use something similar to that, kind of shoot for like a 3-1-2 on the NPK, because you're going to need to produce a lot of leaves, which is N. You don't need to produce too much flowers, which is the middle number, phosphorus, and then that 2, that final number, is going to produce roots or kind of whole system functions of the plant. Temperature is also an important one, but not too crucial. I would say humidity is more important, but the temperature should be around that kind of 78 to 88 degrees. I talked about it with the Thai constellation last week. I think this plant likes that also. She is a little bit more fickle though, a little bit tougher to grow, tougher to root, kind of everything all around. So be careful on the more extremes with the Aurea. At the lower end, she will kind of struggle, and at the upper end, she will also struggle. So kind of keep her smack dab, maybe about 83, 85 will be good. Moving on to humidity, I think she'll do really well right at about 60-ish. I wouldn't get to 65 because of this leaf spot and this kind of blackening that does tend to happen on more of the extremes of temperature as well as humidity. Too low, below 50, you might encounter problems and kind of get that dry flecking, and too high of humidity, you might kind of get like a blackening, like a soft dying back of the leaf. Okay, and here I'm showing you guys how we're propagating the Aurea. The best way to propagate this Aurea is through air layering. As you can see, we put a cup and we've stuffed the aerial roots that have come out of the shoot of the plant into that cup so that they can then be watered by us manually, and that root system will eventually develop there. As we all know, with most Monstera, usually you can just cut it and then stick it in a glass of water or a humid space and prop the roots in aeroid mix or moss, but the Aurea is a little bit different and it's really tough to propagate. I've killed a couple propagations myself. They tend to kind of go into shock and freak out when they don't have adequate water, so it's really important to establish your root system first before you cut it back too much. So for instance, on this big plant, you can see this aerial root, we've had it come out of the node and then we tucked it back into the pot. So as we're watering this plant, we'll allow that root to establish, and if we wanted to take a cutting of this plant, we would cut off at the node and remove that piece that's already rooted down into the pot. And what I showed you back there in the corner is the cup method of sticking the root into a cup. I've done a short or a reel on that, but kind of stick it into a cup or moss wrap or something, and you'll pretty much air layer it into a new root system while it's still intact, living on the mother plant. And generally, they'll just kind of grow slower and root slower than most Monstera variegata. I think that's kind of built into the price, why they're kind of on the higher end of the variegated Monstera, with the exception of the mint and the really rare Monstera variegata. The Aurea just grows slower, it roots slower, it propagates slower, and that leads us into the variegation. As you can see, the variegation comes in a few different styles. Here's more of a sectoral plant, which can cause full variegated leaves, which aren't great, but it can also cause really pretty half moons like that, and then other sectoral style variegations, which we've had to trim this stuff off. From what I understand, the Aurea, just like the Albo, is not a stable variegation. So it's possible you get an all variegated plant and you get an all green plant. It's kind of a risk, unlike the Thai constellation, which is stable. And this is what I would consider to be kind of small form Aurea. I know it's all supposed to be Monstera Deliciosa, but I do find there's two different forms of Aurea also. This is the smaller form, sectoral patterning in the variegation. And then we have the marbled version, larger form Aurea, which creates a very beautiful mixture of colors, a bit more deep in colors, having some yellows and a little bit of creamy mints and other colors through the leaf. And like I've said, the biggest problem with the Aurea is that those variegated parts do brown off and blacken off quickly. This plant has great genetics. And on the variegation and propagation part, remember to inspect the node before you're cutting. If you're looking for a cut and you have these aerial roots, and you've air layered them properly and you have some roots, actually what I do before that is make sure you inspect that node down below to make sure that that pimple or that auxiliary bud is hitting on the stem, not where it's too lemon lime, not where it's too green, but where it has a nice blend of color. And you can see here this really nice striping we have along this stem, really nice candy cane. So I'm looking for the node to be lined up on there, and not too much on the lime green part, not too much on the hunter green part. And finally, pests. I haven't really seen anything attack the Monstera variegata unless it's thrips. I've only had thrips once, and it was a few years back, and technically it was on regular Monstera, but that's the real only thing. I would just still consistently spray with neem. I typically spray these plants with neem every week or 2 weeks just as a preventative, just to be safe. And I'll often spray on top of the rocks also to make sure there's no root bugs in there either. But keep an eye out for spider mites and aphids and all the other things that like to live in a greenhouse, because it's always a possibility. But check out the Aurea. The prices have come down a lot on the plant. It's a fun plant to watch grow, but it can be a little more tricky than the Thai constellation and the Albo. So thanks you guys so much for watching this week's video. If you did enjoy it, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll see you next Saturday for another video about plants. Have a good day.